so many of the requests were just left hanging without a reply of any kind, or mysteriously disappeared from the company's Facebook page, where any talk of refunds or inquiries about delays were swiftly deleted.
Hello, this is Kitty.
Where's my money, bitch?
Just before we get started, I do want to say that this video is brought to you by Keeps. What do Keeps do? Well, they're an online subscription service that helps men keep their hair. Oh my God, what have I been doing with my life? No, I'm just kidding. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's too late for me. My hair is not coming back. But Keeps have doctor-recommended hair loss treatments. These are clinically proven. It's not that snake oil nonsense that you see advertised like, grow your hair back. And I'm like, bro, with what? They're like literal snake oil. I'm like, bro, no. Look, I know the only way for me to get my hair back is like surgery. And I'm like, that is fairly intense. But look, if you've still got hair, you can keep it with their clinically proven treatments, which is nice. Keep it. Keeps. You get it? It combats the symptoms of hair loss. Clever naming there. Treatment plans are affordable. They typically cost half of the pharmacy prices. And also, they're all delivered straight to your customer's door. And it's prescribed and personalized and doctor recommended. I don't understand why, if you're like, I'm going a little bit bald. I need to get some of this treatment. Why would you be like, yeah, I'll go to the doctor. I'll drive there. I'll see the doctor. I'll have a slightly uncomfortable conversation with him about how I'm not sick. I just need to keep my hair. And then I'll have to go to a pharmacy and pay a lot of money for it. And then I'll drive home. And I've wasted half a day, had an embarrassing conversation, and paid more money. This just sells itself. Why do you even need me to tell people about Keeps? This is just obviously the best thing to do. I mean, keep paying me. I love you for it. But, like, if I was losing my hair, I would be doing nothing else. Do you do beards? Like, if my beard starts falling out, can I then use it? Because I feel like I need to use this even though I'm, like, fully bald. Maybe I'll just keep my little hair around the sides. That's not going anywhere. I just look at my dad and I know what I'm in for. And it's like, yeah, bald on top, hair around the sides. I know I'm done. My hair loss journey is complete. Sorry, I'm supposed to be telling you about Keeps. It's 24/7 care and support. They've got these medical advisors, prescribers, and care specialists who help you make your hair goals a reality. Each treatment plan comes with a full year of unlimited messaging, so you can connect with your prescribing doctor about anything, anytime. I imagine about anything. It'd be like, yeah, do you know anything about, just some random topic? It's like, I've been looking at buying a new camera. It's like, no, don't waste the doctor's time. Don't waste his time to talk about the hair stuff. That's what you're there for. Oh my God, we're off the talking points. Get back on it. Everything your hair needs delivered straight to your door. I've hit these points in my rambly way. So let's just do the mandatory call to action. In red here at the bottom, so I know it's important. Hair loss stops with Keeps. Get 50% off your first order. Go to keeps.com/brainblaze or click the link in the description below. That's keeps.com/brainblaze. And now today's video. Hello everybody, welcome back to another special episode of Brainblaze. Danny was like, Simon, just heads up, this one's really long. And I'm like, Danny, why? Am I not busy enough, Danny? Do I not make enough content? Are people like, oh my God, Simon, that guy on YouTube who doesn't have enough videos? No one is like that. And yet I continue to make more, and I continue to make long videos like this. So in a way, thank you, Danny. Brilliant. I have a brand new freshly brewed coffee, also known as Life Force. This is the ZX Spectrum Vega Plus, which, what a cracker of a video title. The worst crowdfunder in history. And I think Danny was like, yeah, these people are really litigious. And then apparently it's nothing to worry about anymore because there was some court thing, or they went out of business or something like that. So we'll sprinkle some allegedlys where necessary. It'll be fun. Let's go.
Put y'all seatbelts on. Psh, YOLO.
I sank into a seat at the most discreet table in the Dog and Bollock, took a first sip of my pint of Bishop's Finger, and mentally prepared for my imminent rendezvous with Ricky Proudfoot. No, I sometimes worry that people who are not British don't understand that there's no pub called the Dog and Bollock. I bet there is, actually. Ricky Proudfoot can't be a real name, but there is. It's maybe an ale, Bishop's Finger, or a lager. Perhaps, I'm not sure. I've probably had it. I've definitely seen it on taps. It's a thing that exists.
Don't lie
to me.
This may sound like a fictional tale, but the incident is broadly true. I've changed the names and the locations and the types of ale, it's an ale, to protect the privacy of the idiotic, and the gullible bishop's finger is a bit too rich and fruity for my taste. Okay, Ricky Proudfoot emerged from the shadows and he dropped a small brown paper bag onto the table. Sorry, that's how you do things. You don't drop things into tables. Use your big brain, Simon. Before shuffling awkwardly to his own seat with a look of anxious trepidation, I took another sip to steady myself. Danny, do you ever wonder that perhaps the reason the scripts are so long is because you tell these lengthy stories to illustrate what I'm sure eventually will come to a point at the top of a very long mountain of stories?
Batman, look at the size of those balls.
Interjected with my interjections. So, Proudfoot, I wasn't sure I'd ever see the day. It's been a long time coming. Proudfoot nodded while glancing nervously at the bag. 2.5 years. I still can't believe I got one. Most of us weren't so lucky. I cleared my throat to answer the $64,000 question. And was it worth the wait? Is it everything you hoped for? Proudfoot looked uncharacteristically downbeat, and this concerns me. Under normal circumstances, he was the most blindly optimistic twit I'd ever met in my life, and I didn't like the way he was fidgeting and staring at his feet. Well, he began. You have to see for yourself, it's not quite what I expected. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. I may have waited 2.5 years, but I couldn't wait another second. I reached inside the brown paper bag, and the evening went largely downhill from there. Danny, that is a hell of an introduction. I feel like I'm reading a story. I am reading a story. Is in the bag that going to be this crowdfunding thing that totally failed? I guess we'll find out. That's what we do here. Let's carry on.
What? You're just ruining it.
On the face of it, the ZX Spectrum Vega Plus should have been a deliciously simple and straightforward crowdfunding campaign. The Luton-based company behind it, Retro Companies Limited, RCL, had already achieved moderate success with a very similar product a year earlier. For those who may not be familiar with the original Sinclair ZX Spectrum, it was a beautiful 8-bit home computer with very odd rubber keys, first launched in 1982. The only reason I know this is because Danny bangs on about Clive Sinclair more than a hammer bangs nails, to be honest, and I'd never heard of this before. I'd heard of Clive Sinclair because, I don't know, he's like British famous, you know? It's like Sir. He's made a Sir for his services to computers? I'm not entirely sure, but he's a dude. It first launched in 1982. Which is a good 5 years before I was born, so that might be why I'm not familiar with it. Quite possibly my favourite machine of all time, the humble little ZX Spectrum, was an early example of a genuinely affordable home computer and the greatest ever achievement from legendary British inventor Sir Clive Sinclair. Sadly, the legend himself wouldn't agree. He originally envisioned the Spectrum as a serious computer, which would be used as an educational tool in schools. Instead, his customers had more fun playing classic games such as Jet Set Willy and Horace Goes Skiing. If it were 2022, people would be like, okay, we've got a computer for school. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to play games on it and we're going to find porn because that's what we do. We don't do spreadsheets, Clive. So Clive had accidentally launched a gaming machine which would sell over 5 million units and spawn around 14,000 titles. Feeling a little disgruntled over the whole thing, Sir Clive put it all behind him and focused all of his attention on the Sinclair C5 tricycle instead. Someone needed to have a word with this guy.
Excuse me, what are you doing?
Yeah, the tricycle was a huge failure. It was one of the earliest Business Blaze videos, back when this channel was called Business Blaze, that we ever made. And, it was shit. Not the video. The video was amazing. The tricycle was shit. The very last original ZX Spectrum rolled off the production line in 1992, long after Sir Clive had sold most of his assets to Sir Alan Sugar's Amstrad. And when RCL decided to create a new version of the machine 23 years later, they naturally disregarded Sir Clive's original vision and focused entirely on those timeless games. The first version of the ZX Vega was launched in 2015, and it was essentially just a tiny plug-in-and-play black box with a few buttons on top. You plugged it into a television set to access around 1,000 vintage games. Isn't this legally grey? Because there are definitely... I don't actually own one, and I'm not even doing an allegedly here. I don't have one of these, but I know they exist. You can go onto AliExpress or whatever. Not that I'd ever recommend this, or I'm sure eBay or wherever, and buy one of these games consoles that plugs into a TV, and it'll be loaded with 1,000 retro games, for N64 or PlayStation or whatever, because all of those games were 4 megabytes big. I was blown away by, Sam, on the screen now, put how big Nintendo 64 GoldenEye was. I saw a Reddit post the other day. Someone was saying it's like all of the entire game was like on 40 megabytes or something. The entire game. Which maybe it's bigger than that. It's got to be. Maybe it's small. I don't know, but it was ridiculous. And now because you've got huge hard disks that are dirt cheap, they just put them onto all of these things illegally or like, you know, in violation of copyright or whatever in China and sell them. But you can't do a Kickstarter around this, can you? Because, well, you're like in Luton. There's laws. I mean, I'm sure there's laws in China, but it doesn't seem like it with all the fake you can buy. I don't know much about Luton other than there's a airport there, but it's in the UK. And the UK have laws. I couldn't really see the point of it myself. I'd been running free Spectrum emulators on my PC since around 2001, on which you could play every specky game ever written and configure them to your heart's content without ever spending a penny. Wait, aren't all these copyright protected though? Doesn't someone own these games? Because I don't know, but doesn't, like, if you write a book, isn't it in the UK it's like 70 years after the death of the author or something? Which is like, why didn't Winnie the Pooh recently come into the public domain? And now there's that Winnie the Pooh movie and it's like, he's hungry for blood. And it's like, oh, what is going on? Who got permission to this? Oh, public domain. And Sherlock Holmes, now there's all those Sherlock Holmes movies because I think that also is now in the public domain. Stuff like that. Sorry, so what I'm essentially saying is like these games aren't that old. Doesn't someone own them still? You can't just rip them off and, I mean, if you're doing them on your PC, then I guess you just download them from some dodgy website. But you can't sell that shit, can you? In contrast, RCL were asking you to spend money on a quite ugly black box with limited functionality and a limited library of preloaded games. Still, the machine was fairly well received, but there was a general feeling that RCL could do better. And in early 2016, RCL announced their intention to do just that. The ZX Vega Plus was the next logical step in delivering 8-bit nostalgia directly into your sweaty palms. The ugly black box had been replaced with a slick and funky handheld device which featured its own impressive full-color LCD screen, so it was an entirely self-contained handheld unit. If that's a Kickstarter or a Crowdfunder or whatever platform they're doing this on, that's bold. Like, I don't know, I think I've done like 2 Kickstarters in my life. I don't even remember what they are, but I remember them all both being a bit shit. And they weren't like complicated electronic devices. I just don't get the feeling this is going to go well. Because I know it's not going to go well, because Danny told me, and we're blazing it. But still. It also came packaged with an option to plug it into your telly, 1,000 preloaded games, and an option to load up additional games via SD card. The crowdfunding project was launched on Indiegogo, where backers were encouraged to pledge £100 to receive their own super cool ZX Vega Plus by September 2016. That seems like a really good deal, and this, if possible, sounds great. It sounds like a really neat invention of pirated games, allegedly? I don't know, I can't get over this. Is no one going to explain this to me? And there were some prestigious names working behind the scenes on bringing the Vega Plus to life. Well, we'd not heard of all of them. One of the 3 directors of the company was a guy called Paul Andrews, who would be working on the technical side of things and would come up with a dedicated new firmware on which these specky games would run. Another director went by the name of David Levy, a former chess champion who had also written kinky books about having sex with robots. Holy okay, David. And working on the PR side of things was a part-time contractor called Suzanne Martin, who was a close personal friend of David's and was apparently very good at PR, although we'll be the judges of that as the story unfolds. A far more interesting name attached to the project was Rick Dickinson, who had designed the original ZX Spectrum in 1982 and who would be working on the design of the prototype for the super swishy Vega Plus. And perhaps the most surprising name of all, for a number of reasons, was Sir Clive Sinclair himself. That is adding some clout to your product, my guys. He's Sir Clive. He's a knight. British people get excited about this. Sir Clive had not owned any legal right to the Spectrum for decades. The rights had kind of accidentally ended up with Sky, this is like Sky. Isn't it owned by News Corporation and Richard Murdoch? Bell. Bell, and I imagine they're probably going to be possibly litigious. Amstrad may have bought out Sinclair in 1986, but then Amstrad itself was much later acquired by Sky in 2007, largely on the strength of the set-top boxes that Amstrad were producing at the time. I remember these set-top boxes. Oh my god, I just remember, I'm sure they were great at the time, with their little blue and yellow screens for navigating Sky, and now it's like, my parents have Sky, and I'm like, what are you up to? It's like, it's super expensive. It's like, I swear to God, they pay like, it's like 80, 100 quid a month or something for Sky. And it's like, you have to watch adverts. It's on when they want you to watch, or you have to record it and then fast forward through adverts on some clunky box with a remote control. And I'm just like, what are you doing? For £100, just subscribe to all of the streaming services. And then you will never have to do any of this nonsense again. What's up?
No. No, I don't think I will.
And they're technically savvy people. My dad is a technically savvy dude. Come on. Not that you need to be technically savvy to do Netflix. But, my parents, they're not like 90 years old and don't understand the internet, is what I'm trying to say. Sky probably couldn't give a deep-fried joystick about the old Sinclair products that they'd accidentally inherited, but it was Sky who agreed to a licensing deal with RCL over the use of the trademark brandings for the Vega Plus. Whoa! How? So RCL's this tiny startup company who's doing an Indiegogo, and Sky's lawyers or whoever actually had a meeting with them and arranged to do this. The reason I didn't think this was a possibility was because it seems absurd. It would be like some dude just being like, hey, can I license all this? Why would this letter even get on someone relevant's desk?
Daddy, chill.
So, why did Sir Clive get involved? He had no current financial connection to the spectrum, and he had always made it clear that he had zero interest in silly video games, and yet the early press reports seem to suggest that he was the mastermind behind this whole operation. Is he not going to be involved? And are they going to have lied about this? Because that would be extraordinary. He was quoted as saying, "The present surge of interest in retro products inspired me to plan the Vega Plus as a handy games console which can be played anywhere." That doesn't sound like Sir Clive, based on what we know about Sir Clive, does it? Is Sir Clive still alive? Did he recently die? I have a feeling he recently died. Hey Siri, is Clive Sinclair alive?
Many months later.
Hey Siri, is Clive Sinclair alive? He died on the 16th of September 2021. Rip to the goat. But I'd bet my last pop noodle that nothing remotely like this ever left his mouth in real life. By this point, Sir Clive was running a tiny company called Sinclair Research, which was in fact just a shareholder of 25% of RCL. It's possible that RCL may have been keen to overinflate Sir Clive's involvement to add an extra dollop of credibility to the project, while Sir Clive himself may have just shrugged and reasoned that he may as well invest in the Vega Plus and grab a few more quid from revisiting the old games he hated, such as Fatworm Blows a Sparky. What the is that game about? Also, he does have an interest in this. He's got 25% of the company. That's a big deal. For a name, essentially. After all, that Sinclair C6 wasn't going to finance itself, and maybe it would be a pretty shrewd investment. It's not like RCL were creating a whole new gaming system from scratch. They were just shoving a Spectrum emulator into a bit of plastic with a screen on the top and a few buttons. This would surely be a hard project to screw up. And the backers were queuing in droves to get their hands on this nostalgic bit of kit. The original Indiegogo funding target had been set at £100,000, but within the space of a few weeks, the campaign had generated a total of £512,000 from nearly 5,000 backers. Holy shit, that is a good chunk of change, boys.
Hot diggity dog.
My mate Ricky Proudfoot was one of those excited backers who had shelled out 100 quid, and he was looking forward to getting his hands on the Vega Plus in September. RCL had already promised that a fully working prototype was waiting to go into production and noted that they may even be able to improve on the delivery date. That was good news for Proudfoot, as he simply couldn't wait. Unfortunately, there was a small delay. RCL never explained why the launch date was pushed back to October, and when October came and went, backers were then informed that they'd definitely receive their units in time for Christmas. RCL took a novel approach to project updates, which were largely overseen by Suzanne Martin. Instead of informing customers of a delay and apologizing for the inconvenience, they would simply go completely silent as the promised shipping date sailed past into the horizon. A few days later, they would then post an upbeat update, which failed to acknowledge a delay and ran along the lines of exciting news, you'll probably get it next month, you lucky people. I would have felt like such a lucky person. You promised I'd get for Christmas, and now you're like, well, that date passed, and now you can get it next month. I'll be like, oh, please. This is like when you're sitting on the tarmac in the airplane, and they're like, we'll be underway in 15 minutes. And then it's like, 15 minutes come and go. Just another 15 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Just tell me how long. And Proudfoot seemed happy with that. He'd often post encouraging responses on the Indiegogo message board, such as, "Great to hear. We've got a lot of faith in you, RCL." It's a good job that Proudfoot was a particularly patient chap, as he would be waiting just a little bit longer. But the funny thing is that the October launch party allegedly went ahead even though there was no sign of a product yet. That's what RCL claimed anyway. A few of the backers had paid for a higher tier perk, which included a VIP ticket to the launch party, but none of them received the promised invite. It's not entirely clear who attended, as every guest was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And when RCL eventually got round to posting suspiciously blurry photographs from the event, it was noted from the metadata on the photographs that they were taken a whole week after the launch party was supposed to have taken place. Guys, you're designing a computer and you're not aware there's like, what's it called? Even I know it's called EXIF data, right? On photos that give you all of this information about where the photos come from, and you can easily strip it out. Or fake it. Come on. Could RCL have fabricated a launch party just to create a few more positive vibes? We may never know the answer to that one. Still, at least Proudfoot and his pals would get a Vega Plus in time for Christmas. Wait, didn't that already pass? Except he didn't. This time RCL did give a little advance notice that another promise was about to be broken when they issued an update in late November, but they did so in typically triumphant style. The update began. The good news you have all been waiting for is finally here. Wait, if this isn't the product is ready, what are they going to spin this into? I can almost see Proudfoot's ears perking up at the opening sentence, but the follow-up sentence must have pricked a hole in his Christmas balloon. We are delighted to announce that we will ship the first ZX Vegas plus Vega Pluses in February 2017. They had been kind enough to offer up a reason on this occasion and quietly acknowledged a delay for the first time. Apparently, they had identified a problem with a button. There were only actually a few very similar buttons on the unit, but RCL claimed that one of them in particular was not up to scratch and he needed to carry out improvements so that it would withstand the rigors of extended gameplay and honor the Sinclair legacy. Too right. That button's going to take some serious hammering after an intense session on Daley Thompson's Decathlon. Daddy, I have no idea about all these games that you're talking about. Proudfoot's response: carry on with the great work, RCL. Not all the backers may have been aware at this point that there had already been an ongoing game of musical chairs behind the scenes at RCL, a game which had started not long after the Indiegogo project had first smashed its target. RCL had been proud to announce the appointment of a couple of new directors, one of whom was former PR contractor Suzanne Martin, who had been elevated up the ranks to sit by her close friend and chess champion David Levy. But RCL had been more reluctant to announce that a couple of other directors had quit under stormy circumstances. Paul Andrews and Chris Smith were the guys who were supposed to have been developing the dedicated firmware. When the news finally broke, the knives were out on both sides. It's a bit more than a button then, chaps, isn't it? It's like, the guys who were making the firmware quit. Do you have that firmware? Because it sounds like it's like everything was going, just a button that needs fixing. Doesn't seem like that was the truth, allegedly.
Everything that makes it successful is exactly what makes it dangerous.
Paul Andrews claimed that his relationship had broken down irretrievably after David Levy had been unable or unwilling to satisfy concerns about the financial state of the company and where exactly all the money was flowing. Uh-oh. You got £500,000, basically, to develop this thing. And it's like, that money should go into the development of said thing, right? In response, David Levy and Suzanne Martin falsely accused the two former directors of misappropriating funds. Holy shit, guys. Falsely accusing someone of fraud? You might not want to do that. And claimed that the pair had been secretly working together on a rival handheld system based on the other 8-bit computer, the Commodore 64, which would allegedly have constituted a breach of contract. There is some truth in this latter point, which we'll return to in a moment, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a rival system. If you were a Spectrum fan, you'd buy the handheld Spectrum. If you were a C64 fan, you'd buy the handheld C64. If you loved them both, you'd buy both. The curious thing... would you? But that's like saying I love PlayStation and I love Xbox. Am I going to buy a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox? What's it called? X? Something? Xbox Series X? What's that new Xbox called? I don't even know. Am I going to buy both? No, I'm going to make a decision. Because I don't want to spend like... How much are these things these days? 500 quid? 400 quid? Something like that? That's a lot of money. The curious thing about these resignations is, whilst the two former directors seemed keen to totally distance themselves from the project, they each retained a 25% share in the company. This meant that half of RCL was now owned by a couple of people who didn't want anything to do with it and were publicly slagging off the current directors. Well, that sounds like a failure of contract, because if you're starting up this thing and you don't have it that if you quit you get less shares, like within a certain time period, isn't that something like these startup companies do? That seems pretty smart to do that, because otherwise this situation happens. It's a bit like PETA deciding to snap up 50% of Big Joe's electric shock horsewhips. Is it? Holy seems a bit more extreme. Whilst electric Joe's horsewhips. I like that. Whilst all of this was going on, Proudfoot may have been mildly disappointed to discover that he wasn't getting his Vega Plus in February 2017 after all. In fact, he wasn't getting it at any point in 2017. But he does get it, right? Because in the beginning, we had Danny and his mate sitting down in the pub, and his mate coming in with a brown paper bag with what I assume is this device in it. So they are delivering something at some point. So I'm not sure how this can be the worst failure of crowdfunding failure ever, because tons of stuff just doesn't get delivered and just seems to go away in some sort of like crazy fraud. It's like, where's that guy? He disappeared. He's on the run. But at least Suzanne Martin was on hand to deliver regular optimistic updates throughout the busy year ahead. However, the updates and reactions from RCL were becoming increasingly erratic as many of the backers understandably began to get a little impatient.
I demand satisfaction!
Suzanne promised that new photographs and video footage of the finished units were imminent, but then came out with peculiar excuses as to why she hadn't been able to publish them on time, including nonsensical statements about how a courier company had accidentally sent the footage back to the depot. This is 2017. No one is mailing footage anywhere. I'm pretty sure even Dropbox existed in 2017. Come on, guys, that's not good enough. Why would a courier even be involved, particularly one who didn't understand how to deliver an item? The year was 2017. Just whip out your phone, take a video, and upload it online to appease the agitated backers. Yeah, you could literally do this. You could literally, I don't know if you could do it on YouTube, but you could take a video. Now you could take a video and upload direct to YouTube right from your phone. There must have been services to be able to do this. What, you just stupid excuses. Come on. When the delayed videos of the completed units finally emerged, it was very dubiously edited footage crammed with suspect fade-outs. The button presses didn't match with what was happening on screen, and the footage provided no evidence that RCL had a fully working Vega Plus on their hands. I don't understand what's so hard to develop about this. Like, I'm not some computer genius or anything. But you need a screen, you need a processor, you need a plastic-formed case, and you need some software to be able to run a bunch of games that were developed a very long time in the past. This doesn't seem like rocket science. Can't we just get it done? It appeared that the intention was simply to mask the many problems with the troubled devices, and that the frustrating delays were down to touching up the fishy-wishy video edits rather than couriers accidentally driving backwards. Any negative comments or inquiries that appeared on the Indiegogo page had a mysterious habit of disappearing. Someone's deleting the comments! Suzanne confirms at one point that we aren't deleting any comments. Yeah, but you are. People, this is an interesting one, because people will be like, Simon, I left a comment on this and it got deleted. And honestly, like 99% of the time, I'm not deleting the comments. You probably just accidentally got flagged for spam or used a swear word or a list of, or like something on the list of banned words, like pronunciation is on there. And it's like, that's just, it never got published. But also, sometimes I just do delete comments because I don't like them. I'll just see a comment, it's like, that's not very nice. I'm just going to delete that. I just don't hide it. It's like, I'm the boss. People are like, free speech? No. What are you talking about? You don't get free speech in my comment section. Well, at least I'm not a liar.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
But when faced with clear evidence of disappearing comments, she claimed that the team were aware of a number of bugs in the system. You were you? Bugs. Indiegogo's bugs. What do Indiegogo have to say about that? You liars, allegedly. Backers were, in my opinion, beginning to wonder what exactly had happened to the £500,000 raised by the campaign, and Suzanne insisted that this money had been ring-fenced. Leaked bank statements from RCL later indicated this was most definitely not the case. Also, you got a small little company. How are your bank statements getting leaked? Oh my god. There's a mole. How many of you are there? Who's leaking this? It's someone you definitely know. And Suzanne had a nasty habit of diving into social media groups dedicated to the retro gaming scene in a bid to silence any public discussion of the Vega Plus. If a user ever dared to express an opinion that the machine might never see the light of day, Suzanne would angrily demand that they retract the comment, accuse the user of spreading hate speech. Suzanne, do you know what hate speech is? And inciting violence? Please. Come on. And threaten action from the Metropolitan Police. If someone said that to me, I'd be like, you can fuck right off. Thank you very much. Report me to the police for my hate speech. She'll be like, on this video, this is hate speech. Like, Suzanne, it's not. It's not. It's not. And I'm pretty sure that the Metropolitan Police don't have jurisdiction where I live anyway. I'll need to check on that, though. Some of the smaller social media groups appeared to be quite frightened of Suzanne and promptly banned any discussion of the device. But this was starting to get a bit weird. And don't forget that Suzanne Martin was supposed to be the PR expert. I wouldn't have put it past her to threaten the BBC with legal action if they ever dared to report on the delayed production. You know what the BBC would do? They have a lot of money. They definitely have more money than you and better lawyers. And they'd just be like, no. Because if this was in any way to the police, to a court, whatever, come on now. Please. Hold that thought. Really? Oh, really? Oh, really? This is going to get good.
Girl, get ready. They going to meet me your ass to death, bitch. Wait, what does mean? You know how they, meme. Yeah, that.
It appears that Suzanne may have been at the very heart of the rift between the original directors. A series of early letters between Paul Andrews and David Levy reveals how Paul was becoming increasingly concerned about how the funds were being spent and suggested that RCL didn't currently have the resources to keep on paying Suzanne a big salary for her then contracted role as PR guru. Paul's point was that they needed to start spending money on producing the damn machine rather than throwing big chunks of it at David's close friend in return for promoting a device that didn't exist yet. Yeah, that's a little bit corrupt, isn't it? Because you're like paying her to do this PR stuff. Don't know how much you're paying her. And that's like legit, sure. But you should be spending the money on something better. And also, she's your mate. That's a little bit sketchy, isn't it? I don't know if that's a crime, but it is sketchy. He generously suggested buying Suzanne some flowers. Okay. David Levy's angry response was to accuse Paul of being disloyal, and he insisted that the company still needed Suzanne. Over the course of the increasingly heated correspondence, David at one point accepted an offer of resignation from Paul, which was never given. I accept your resignation. I didn't resign. I accept your resignation. But it's perhaps no surprise that at around this time, Paul and fellow original director Chris Smith gave up and did indeed resign as directors, taking their firmware with them to focus their efforts instead on the handheld C64 system. This prompted David Levy to promote Suzanne to director while simultaneously alleging that Paul and Chris had used funds from RCL to start up a rival system. He also stated that unless Paul and Chris reimbursed the company with the £55,000 of misappropriated funds, he would seize their shares of the company. That doesn't sound legal or allowed or like what? You can't just be like, that's mine now. Doesn't work like that. There's a contract. We'll check on how that pans out later on. The C64 project failed to reach the Indiegogo funding target, although it did eventually roll into production and attracted reasonable sales. But now, one of the other directors behind that alternative project, a guy called Darren Melbourne, was about to put another spanner into the works at RCL. Darren was getting pissed off with all the public spats and legal threats revolving around the two rival machines, and he was convinced that RCL were leading backers up the garden path with their endless string of missed deadlines, and Darren had contacts. He knew the rights holders to nearly all of those 1,000 games that were meant to be preloaded onto the Vega Plus, and he got busy persuading them to withdraw permission for their classic games to be bundled with such a controversial and doomed device. See, what's the law there? Because it's like he's definitely sabotaging their other project, but he's also just informing them and letting them make a decision as the rights holders. I'm amazed that they got all the rights for this stuff. That kind of blows my mind, still. And they took notice of what he had to say. By August 2017, RCL had once again announced a new shipping date for the Vega Plus. It was definitely coming in November, except of course it wasn't. When November rolled around, RCL explained that they were still experiencing problems with one of the buttons. Maybe it was a different button this time. You would have thought it might have taken less than 18 months to fix a problem with a button, but it appears that when RCL weren't blaming the delays on former directors attempting to sabotage the project, they were blaming a particularly troublesome bottom. Proudfoot's response? Looking forward to getting the Vega Plus 2018. It will be worth the wait. Oh my god, dude, it's not coming. Just buy a PlayStation Portable and be happy.
I mean, I knew you would come, but you've come.
I have.
come.
Can't you used to be? You could definitely load pirate games onto PlayStation Portable. I remember not doing that. Definitely never doing that back in the day. And this was like 2005, 2004. Come on! There still wasn't any sign of the device by mid-2018, but RCL did encounter another unexpected problem in May. The domain names belonging to RCL now directed users to websites that were brutally critical of the company. This is like a clusterfuck. God damn, everything is going wrong. RCL reported that a security breach had taken place and they were working with Action Fraud and the Metropolitan Police on identifying the culprits and resolving the embarrassment. In fact, there was no security breach at all. Paul Andrews had suddenly realized that his name was still attached to the domains over which he had still got full control. He could probably also log. He was probably the one who was logging into the bank accounts. He's like, you fired me and I went to start my rival thing, but you never took away my login for the bank account. Yeah, amateurs. As this 25% shareholder was still keen to distance himself from RCL, he released the domain names back into the wild. At this point, a sharp-thinking critic of RCL spotted that the domain names had suddenly become available, snapped them up, and pointed them to anti-RCL websites for shit and giggles. Maybe Paul should have informed the current directors of his intentions, but they were hardly on speaking terms at this point. And also, that. You don't have to do that. Just let the domains expire and they'll go back to the wild anyway. You're not doing anything, like you're not sabotaging, you're just not taking action. You're just standing back and letting it all go to shit. Further into a deep pile of shit.
Yes.
And you would have thought that RCL may have realized that leaving the company domain names in the hands of a disgruntled former director for 2 years wasn't a very shrewd tactic on their part. Yeah, they probably just forgot though. In their fairness, they may have been too busy trying to fix a button to give it much thought, but now others were beginning to turn against RCL. By 2018, Paul and Chris were demanding a shareholders meeting with a view to getting rid of David Levy, Suzanne Martin, and the other serving director, Janko Mrsic-Flogel. Okie dokie. And now they had Sir Clive Sinclair on their side. Sir Clive's company still owned a 25% share of RCL, but he too had lost faith in the current directors and was probably regretting getting involved in the silly video game nonsense again. This now meant that 75% of the shareholders were attempting to oust the other 25%. Yeah. Okay, they just get together and this is done. Indiegogo is also expressing deep concerns over the project and threatening to call in a debt collection agency unless RCL could provide them with a working unit within 3 days. Holy Indiegogo do this? Respect. Top respect for that. I thought this was just one of the... I kind of thought this stuff was a bit fly-by-night, to be honest. And it would just be like... Because there's plenty of scams. We talked about them before. Or like shady dealings. Kind of respect that they'd go in and be like, you got 3 days and we're going to collect those debts and send as much money back to people as we can. That's cool. Good for you, Indiegogo. I'm impressed. When the BBC announced their intention to report on this latest development, RCL initially threatened the corporation with legal action. That's not going to look good. Insisting that such a report would be factually misleading, as Indiegogo had issued no such ultimatum. In fact, it wouldn't have been misleading in the slightest. Indiegogo later confirmed that RCL had failed to provide them with a working unit as requested and was now in the process of appointing a debt collection agency. So, BBC were like, we're going to report on this. They were like, no, Indiegogo weren't doing that, but they totally were. The BBC are going to know that. They're going to go to Indiegogo and be like, Indiegogo, did you do this? And when you see it's from journalist@bbc.com, you're probably going to answer, because someone in PR is going to be like, oh, I've heard of that one. Like, I don't know, I'll get emails from people wanting a comment on a past video or whatever, and it'll be like from John's blog at, .cc or whatever. And I'll just be like, archive. But if it's from BBC, you'll be like, what's going on? What do you need? What have I done?
You have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people. What say you in your defense?
RCL also demanded full editorial control over any report that the BBC might concoct, clearly not having any understanding of how the BBC, or indeed journalism, works. They don't usually consult with Putin before releasing a news report involving Russia, but then RCL adopted a different strategy to silence the BBC. David Levy declared that the directors had been the targets of credible death threats which were being investigated by the police. He informed the BBC that this was now a police matter and that any report from the corporation would put the directors up further risk of serious harm and distress. That sounds a little over the top. It does, doesn't it, Danny? I can see why some baggers may have felt miffed that they'd shelled out £100 and still couldn't play Benny Hill's Madcap Chase on their handheld devices, but I wouldn't have thought that they'd feel compelled to go on a killing spree as a direct result. No, it's also, £100 is not, it's not a small amount of money. But it is also a small amount of money. No one's like getting killed over that.
Want my money? Jesus! Bring your little stupid ass on.
However, the BBC was naturally a little concerned over this and delayed the report for quite some time as they asked the directors to provide evidence of the physical threats. So they did succeed in delaying BBC, which in a way is kind of impressive. When the directors failed to come back with so much as a crime reference number, yeah, it's a delay, but it's going to happen, and then that's going to go in the article, isn't it? And it's not going to look good. It's probably why we know about it now. This is some Streisand effect in action. The BBC went ahead and transmitted their filthy, stinking report of confirmed facts. Like the BBC would, because they're the BBC. RCL was now fighting against their former directors, Sir Clive Sinclair, Indiegogo, and the BBC. And they were also now fighting against many of their own backers, not in a physical sense, but it's understandable that many of the backers were now demanding a full refund. Not Proudfoot, obviously, he still had blind faith in the company and the product, but others posted their refund requests on the Indiegogo campaign page and the company's social media pages. To be fair, a small number of them were lucky enough to receive a refund, and Suzanne later claimed that we have never refused to refund a backer. That might be technically correct, but a problem still remains when so many of the requests were just left hanging without a reply of any kind, or mysteriously disappeared from the company's Facebook page, where any talk of refunds or inquiries about delays were swiftly deleted.
Hello, this is Kitty.
Where's my money, bitch? I gotta give back.
That might have just been another bug, though. Please. Allegedly. As one fuming backer put it, I suppose if you never check the page, your email, or any other forms of contact that people have used to get in touch with you, you technically never say no. Just one of 5,000 backers took the case to a small claims court in 2018, where the judge ruled that an implied contract of sale had indeed been made between the company and this specified backer. That is gonna set a precedent, my guys. RCL was ordered to pay back a total of £584 in compensation, travel costs, and the loss of earnings for the backer and his two witnesses, who, funnily enough, were Paul Andrews and his Commodore 64 buddy, Darren Melbourne. Nicely done, chaps. That is 6 times the investment, and if they got £500,000 in the door, and that's the precedent that's been set, that's £3 million, boys. You got £3 million, or are you in big trouble?
You got till 5 o'clock. You hear me? You got till 5 o'clock.
David Levy didn't attend the hearing, but he did send the backer a refund of £155 the night before the hearing in a desperate last-minute attempt to halt the legal action, a move which the judge described as inappropriate. I don't know. Is that inappropriate? It feels like, look, anything before court is negotiation. It's just part of a settlement agreement, isn't it? It seems like worth a crack. I don't know, that doesn't seem that bad, but obviously the judge has a lot more legal experience and knowledge than I do, so it's inappropriate. The reason that David Levy refused to attend the hearing is because he felt threatened by a group of trolls who had promised to chop his cock off outside the court. No one's doing that, David. No knife-wielding trolls were spotted on the day, looking for his penis. You're not going to believe this, but RCL did get round to shipping 400 Vega Plus units in July 2018. These special new blankety-blank versions were dispatched to 400 backers who agreed to receive a Vega Plus with none of the preloaded games. This is always going to be a problem now for RCL, as they had lost permission to include any of the 1,000 titles that were originally promised. Oh god, you lost them all. That guy had some connections. It wasn't quite blankety blank though. A total of 19 games were bundled with the device, but they were all obscure, crappy titles written by the same guy, Jonathan Caldwell, seemingly the only guy on the planet who was capable of coding a Spectrum game and working with RCL. Despite the fact that well over 4,000 other backers were still waiting for their machines, RCL still regarded this latest development as a glorious triumph. They observed it has been a well-documented, long and difficult road for the company. We have now proved all negative claims to be false. Well, we'll be the judges of that. You see, Proudfoot was one of those lucky backers who had agreed to receive a largely empty handheld gaming device. And that brings us right back to the small brown paper bag on the table of the dog and bollock. Holy shit, Danny. It's only been 43 minutes, which cut down because, you know, there's some tangents that gets cut out. Sometimes I itch my nose, that kind of stuff. What? I wonder how efficient I've been. It just clocked over 43 minutes. I wonder what the length on the actual video is now, because that's the exact amount of stuff that's been cut out. Maybe minus 30 seconds as I set up the camera at the beginning.
We've literally come full circle.
The first thing I noticed as I pulled the ZX Vega Plus out of the bag was that it didn't look much like the funky concept images from the Indiegogo campaign page. Original Spectrum designer Rick Dickinson must have long since departed the project, since as he certainly wouldn't have approved of this. It looked cheap and tacky and flimsy and strangely homemade. Proudfoot was already urging me to be careful when I dared to turn it over in my hands, as it felt a sneeze within a 2-mile radius might just shatter the whole bloody thing. Proudfoot told me the device had arrived in cheap packaging with no protection, no instructions, and no charging cable. RCL later claimed that the company had purposefully chosen simple, ethical packaging to cut down on plastic waste. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But I'm not sure that would have entirely satisfied customers who received broken or heavily scratched units. As 2 of the original directors had taken off with the dedicated firmware, the ZX Vega Plus ultimately just used a free open source Spectrum emulator. The supplied games weren't just the barrel scrapings of what the ZX Spectrum could deliver. Many of them didn't work out of the box, and you had to fiddle about with key mapping in order to get anywhere, a task made trickier by the lack of instructions. Most people just resorted to randomly pressing buttons in confusion until something started happening on the screen. And oh, let us touch upon those buttons. You'd think after 2.5 years of perfecting them, RCL would have been on the brink of producing the finest buttons ever to be pressed in the history of the universe. No, RCL have been busy up to all sorts of other shit that wasn't making a games machine. But no, they were dire. It looked as if they had been set too deep into the case, so there was not enough actual button protrusion for them to work effectively. They were unresponsive and temperamental. Some of them appeared to work on release rather than on depression, which is not how you're meant to play video games, not even ones. And they were so uncomfortable to use that you really couldn't play on the Vega Plus for more than about 10 minutes before you felt compelled to put the damn thing down and give your hands a rest. In short, after 2.5 years, RCL had released a limited number of flimsy and flawed devices, which were nothing more than a free emulator housed inside a crap plastic case with terrible buttons. This may have cost those 400 backers around £100, but I would have been disappointed if I'd shelled out a £5 on one of these. Proudfoot's response? You know, even I've got to admit that it's a bit shit. I bet you could buy something just like this off of AliExpress in about 5 minutes. I bet you could. Still, at least the case may have aroused a tiny dose of nostalgia for some retro fans, as it did feel a little Spectrum-y in the sense that it featured the word Sinclair on the front. But not for long, shortly after these blankety-blank versions were released, Sky revealed that they had revoked RCL's license to use the brand names Sinclair and Spectrum on any future Vega product. The interesting point here is that Sky was never even receiving any money from the arrangement. They had agreed that any royalty should be paid directly to charity, possibly because they're an incredibly generous and charitable organization, or possibly because they really couldn't be asked with any of this old Sinclair nonsense. But they were asked enough to strip away the rights from RCL when the situation became too woeful to ignore. RCL's initial public response to the reporting of this latest development was to declare that it was fake news, and that Sky had definitely not terminated the license agreement.
Your organization is terrible. You are fake news.
There's facts that are different, guys. There's like records of facts. They're gonna respond with the facts, guys. Come on. So Sky tried to make it a little clearer with their next statement. Due to the consistently substandard build quality of the units tested and the continued failure of RCL to deliver on its promises, we have unfortunately been forced to withdraw the license. Pretty clear, isn't it? RCL would not release another product of any kind. The game has well and truly crashed. Although RCL had been incredibly noisy during the long and largely aborted journey of the Vega Plus, their exit from the scene was notably fairly quiet. The shareholder fights didn't appear to get anywhere at all, as everyone just appeared to give up and walk away. That includes Paul Andrews, Chris Smith, Sir Clive Sinclair, Suzanne Martin, and David Levy. By the time RCL was officially wound up in 2019, Janko Mrsit Flogel was the sole remaining director. Although, who is this random guy? Although it's not known how many of the other 4,000 backers got a refund in the end, we do know that the majority of them were left empty-handed. Indiegogo may have officially sent the campaign to a debt collection agency, but nothing ever came of it. A petition was launched to get the likes of David Levy and Suzanne Martin prosecuted for theft and fraud, but interest seemed to fade away. And we still don't know where exactly the supposedly ring-fenced £500,000 ended up. The results of the final public spat emerged in 2019, when the High Court finally ruled on David Levy's long-running efforts to seize control of the shares belonging to the 2 original directors, Paul Andrews and Chris Smith, on the grounds that they'd misappropriated funds. David Levy, just leave it, mate. It's amazing that no one's chasing you for the $500,000, mate. So just leave it and walk away. Come on. David Levy alleged that Paul and Chris had also forged letters, lied in court, stolen domain names, hacked emails, and encouraged campaigns of harassment and abuse. The judge rejected all of the accusations, ordered David Levy and Suzanne Martin to pay over £38,000 in legal costs. Wow. Things may have turned out very differently if everybody could have just got along from the beginning. If this was a Spectrum game, it would have been Mr. Wong's loopy laundry. Paul and Chris clearly had issues on how the money was being pissed away, whereas David Levy seemed more concerned on giving a salary to the PR ninja that was Suzanne Martin. Allegedly. When Paul and Chris walked away as directors, they were taking their firmware and technical expertise with them. It's odd that they stayed on as shareholders, but it's possible that they hope to wrestle back control of the company in the long game. In the meantime, this left David Levy and Suzanne Martin with the task of building the units from scratch, and it seems that they didn't really have a clue what they were doing. Yeah, because their technical guys left. These are just the guys, one's PR and one's the business guy. The guys who were going to build it left. That's bad. Instead of focusing on getting the product out to backers, they seemed more concerned with closing down discussion, threatening legal action, demanding editorial control over the BBC's output, posting misleading video footage, and blaming the former directors for everything that had gone wrong. And it's such a shame that this well-publicized show, which should have run like clockwork, ended up putting many potential backers off crowdfunding campaigns for life. Honestly, most crowdfunding campaigns put crowdfunders off. It put me off. Even Ricky Proudfoot never touched another Indiegogo campaign after this. He decided he was better off investing his time and money in BitConnect instead. Oh no! Keep up the great work, BitConnect!
What's up, BitConnect?
I didn't like the thought of poor old Proudfoot feeling deflated by the Vega Plus though, so before he left the dog and bollock, I gave him a gift. I gave him my old Nintendo DS, which had been left idling in a drawer for years. It's a nice, solid build. It's a comfortable play. And if you fiddle around a little bit, you can run a perfectly good ZX Spectrum emulator on it. Exactly, that's what I was saying. You could do all this on the PSP, like 20 years ago. Proudfoot walked away that night with a nice quality handheld device crammed with thousands of proper Spectrum games and a new spring in his step. The Nintendo DS was released in 2004. It's literally 20 years ago, almost. It makes you wonder why any of this ever happened. It does indeed, doesn't it, Danny? And this is the end of today's long video. Danny, do you ever wonder that perhaps the reason the scripts are so long is because you tell these lengthy stories to illustrate what I'm sure eventually will come to a point at the top of a very long mountain of stories?
Batman, look at the size of those balls.